The ceremony should have been flawless. Rows of young men, rigid in their freshly pressed uniforms, eyes forward, boots polished to a mirror's shine. Flags snapped against the late summer breeze. Families filled the stands, clutching programs like sacred relics, some trembling with pride, others holding back tears of hard-won relief. But everything, every trumpet note, every word of the speaker, every proud heartbeat, stopped the moment the commander's gaze locked onto a single woman seated in the second row. He froze. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, cutting through the crowd as though nothing else existed. It wasn't her posture, though she sat straight as a rifle barrel, despite her shoulders carrying a lifetime of weight. It wasn't her silence, though she hadn't spoken a word since the ceremony began. It was her forearm, bare, steady, unmoving. And there, inked in bold black script, was a tattoo that made the commander's breath hitch in his throat. "Not here," he muttered under his breath. "Not now." But it was already too late. The weight of his stare silenced the rows behind her. An unease spread like a ripple on dark water. Mothers stopped fanning themselves. Fathers leaned forward. Even the cadets, trained not to flinch at gunfire, felt the sudden shift of air. And yet, she did not lower her sleeve. She did not hide it. The tattoo gleamed in the sun, unapologetic, undeniable. A name. A date. And beneath it, a line of scripture etched into skin like a scar. "Greater love hath no man than this." The commander's face hardened. He turned abruptly to his aide, whispering words that sent an urgent shiver down the ranks. The ceremony faltered. The cadence broke. And for the first time in the history of Navy SEAL graduations, everything stopped. Her name was Maria Vega, though most in the crowd didn't know it. They knew only the outline of her story, the headlines years ago, the folded flag handed into her trembling arms. But no one there knew the truth as she carried it, the truth carved into her skin, into her bones, into her silence. Maria had been a Navy nurse, 20 years in uniform. She had patched broken bodies in dusty forward operating bases, felt the sting of helicopter rotors whipping sand into her eyes as stretchers poured in. She had held the hands of the dying, whispered promises to mothers thousands of miles away that their sons would not leave this world alone. Her own son, Daniel, had grown up watching her slip into scrubs and boots before dawn, watching her tape photographs of wounded men she'd patched up onto the refrigerator with the solemnity of a priest. He had absorbed it all, the sacrifice, the service, the silence. So, it surprised no one when he enlisted. But war is a merciless teacher. Daniel never came home. His name was carved into a marble wall and into his mother's skin, permanently etched in black across her forearm. That tattoo was not rebellion. It was remembrance. It was armor. It was her vow that his sacrifice would never be erased. And now, on this day of all days, it had drawn the cold, unflinching wrath of a commander who believed rules stood above remembrance. The commander was a man bound to regulation. His medals told of his service, his spine of his discipline. He had buried his own men too, but never once had he permitted himself to bleed outside the neat lines of protocol. And to him, that tattoo was a violation. Out of place. Too loud, too raw, too permanent for the clean image of the Navy's most elite. He whispered to his aide, "Remove her." Quietly. But quietly was impossible. The moment two officers stepped from the sidelines, the crowd stiffened. Parents exchanged wary glances. Graduates held their breath, afraid to move, afraid to speak. The officers approached Maria with hesitation, as though they sensed the weight of something sacred around her. "Ma'am," one began softly, "the commander." Maria looked up, her dark eyes steady as tidewater. She did not speak. She did not move. She simply placed her hand gently over her forearm, fingers resting protectively against the ink. The officer faltered. He swallowed, glanced at his partner. This was not a woman to be manhandled. This was not a woman who would cause a scene. But this was also not a woman who would leave. And so the standoff began. The silence deepened, pressing against every chest in the courtyard. The young graduates shifted uncomfortably in formation. Some clenched their jaws. Others stared straight ahead, fighting the urge to glance at the woman whose quiet defiance now threatened to undo the sanctity of their day. Maria did not rise. She did not argue. She simply remained still, her tattoo visible, her breath steady. And then, something unexpected stirred. One of the cadets, standing at rigid attention in the front row, allowed his eyes to flicker sideways. Just once. Just long enough to catch sight of her. His throat tightened. Because he knew. He had known Daniel Vega. They had trained together, bled together, dreamed together of this very day. Daniel hadn't made it. But his mother had. And this graduate, this new SEAL, would not let her be erased. He shifted his weight, barely perceptible, a tiny rebellion against the stillness of formation. Then another graduate noticed. Then another. Until slowly, like the tide rising against a seawall, the front row of cadets began to break the rigid silence. Not with words. Not with movement. But with their eyes. Every one of them turned, one by one, toward Maria. The commander saw it. His jaw clenched tighter. He barked at the aide to restore order. But authority is fragile when it rests on fear, and in that moment, fear was no longer in command. Maria remained unmoving, but her presence filled the courtyard like a rising anthem. And then, quietly, almost reverently, the graduate who had known Daniel broke rank. He stepped forward, boots echoing against concrete. Gasps rippled through the stands. Protocol shattered. He turned to face Maria directly. His voice was steady, though thick with emotion. "Ma'am," he said, and every syllable seemed to pierce the heavy air. "Your son trained beside us. His courage carried us. And today he graduates with us." Maria's hand tightened over her tattoo. Her eyes glistened. But she did not speak. She didn't have to. Because in that instant, row after row of SEAL graduates broke formation, turning as one to face her. The commander's face blanched with fury. His voice thundered commands that no one followed. His authority collapsed beneath the silent weight of honor. And then, in one final act that sealed the moment forever, every graduate raised his arm. And there, sharp and precise, they saluted, not the commander, not the flag, but the mother with the tattoo. The crowd rose to its feet. Mothers wept openly. Fathers pressed trembling hands against their hearts. Strangers stood in reverence, moved by something no speech could have delivered. Maria remained seated, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, her arm trembling as she returned the salute. Her silence had spoken louder than any words. Later, no one remembered the commander's speech. No one remembered the order of the ceremony, the polished precision of the drill. They remembered only this: the day a graduation stopped cold, the day an entire generation of warriors stood in honor of one grieving mother and the ink that carried her son's name. It was said for years afterward, whispered in training halls and chow lines, carried like folklore through the ranks. Strength isn't in the orders shouted. It's in the silence you can't ignore. And another phrase, carved into memory as deeply as the tattoo into Maria's skin. Some heroes never stand on the stage. They sit in the crowd, carrying names the world must never forget. The commander, stripped by the moment of all his ceremony and control, never spoke of it again. But in the years that followed, a quiet change rippled through the ranks. Regulations softened toward the symbols carried by families, toward the tattoos that spoke louder than medals. It was Maria's silent defiance that had opened the door. She had not come to fight. She had not come to challenge. She had come only to witness her son's dream fulfilled through the men who stood in his place. And in doing so, she reminded them all of a truth that even commanders must bow to. That honor belongs not to the powerful, but to the ones who bear loss with dignity, who carry memory like fire, who refuse to let sacrifice be erased. And so, years later, when young SEALs recounted their graduation day, they did not speak of the commander. Hay spoke of Maria Vega, the mother with the tattoo. They spoke of the silence that stopped the world. They spoke of the salute that rewrote the meaning of honor. And as the years pass, her words, though never spoken aloud that day, echo in the hearts of all who remember. Do not measure a soldier's life by its length. Measure it by the love it leaves behind. If you've made it this far, take a moment, wherever you are, to honor those who've carried names inked into their skin, their hearts, their memories. Drop a comment and share where you're watching from. Share your thoughts on Maria's story. And if you want more stories that honor silent heroes like her, make sure to subscribe. Because sometimes, the most powerful battles are fought not with weapons or commands, but with silence that demands respect.